I've been doing food photography professionally for many years, and one of the techniques I like to use is to make an item stand out is by using a shallow depth of field. If you look at these photos, you'll notice how the subject is sharp and the background is soft and out of focus. Many of these photos I created in my own kitchen using only window light. I have another video on this, and I will attach the link in the description. Usually when I'm shooting from above, I'll get the whole image in focus. Much like a landscape photographer using a small aperture to get the image to be sharp from the foreground to the background. Depth of field is the area of a photograph that is in focus. For example, in the shot of these cream puffs I shot for a local bakery, I had the front one in focus, back one's way out of focus, probably shot at f2.8, very large aperture. And this brings emphasis to this one cream puff so your eye knows where to go, because your eye will generally go to the sharpest part of a photograph. Likewise, in this glass of bourbon, I had these other bottles of bourbon in the background and threw them out of focus and put a light back coming back through them to create kind of an interesting background. But then the emphasis comes to this glass of bourbon in the foreground. Also, like these chicken wings, I put the emphasis on this one on the front. The background just adds support and makes an interesting background. This was shot for a restaurant in Boston, shot right on the waterfront, which is kind of cool. It was a restaurant that specializes in seafood and had this bowl of clam chowder here. And we put our background up close to the window just to get through the background out of focus and kind of a little overexposed. So your attention comes to here, but then this kind of creates an environment, kind of tells a story. This fish item shot for a restaurant, I'm trying to remember, I think this is in Beverly Hills, at a restaurant there. It was a fish dish. My attention comes here. This out of focus background just makes a kind of an interesting background. This was shot for another restaurant in Boston, and it's mac and cheese, kind of the best I've ever had. But you can see here by throwing this attention here, the background going soft, it just makes an interesting photograph. This was shot for a restaurant in Beverly Hills, I believe. And this dish, you can see even this burlap I have the plate on is going out of focus in the background. So your attention comes here, obviously, to the sharpest part of the photograph. Same with this. It's also shot for that same restaurant in Beverly Hills. And here, the shrimp salad, I had my emphasis here, and I had some bread stuff in the background. And this just makes it, brings your attention again to the salad. This was shot for a restaurant in Boston. And these sliders, this is one of their signature items. And we had the emphasis come into the one in the foreground, little beer in the background. And you can see even this is going a little soft. These go very soft. This was also shot for a restaurant in Boston. These scallops, emphasis goes to the front scallops. These are going out of focus, and the background just becomes kind of a blur. Here's one strawberry on top of a bunch of strawberries, but because of my aperture, my large aperture, and I was very close to the subject, that these, it's only maybe an inch from here to here, but that's how shallow my depth of field was on this particular item. So what affects depth of field? There's three things. One, the aperture, and second is the focal length of the lens, how long the lens is. Like, is it a 50 millimeter, 80 millimeter, 100 millimeter? What is the focal length of the lens? And the distance from the subject, how close you are to it. To get really shallow depth of field, there's three things that really affect that. You can have a wide open aperture, and a long lens, or getting close to the subject. If you can do all three of these, it's really good, but usually what we start with is a wide open aperture, and you're usually going to use a long lens. You don't want to use a wide angle lens to get shallow depth of field. and also getting fairly close to the subject helps. So here are these bowl of raspberries. This was shot at f2.8, very large aperture. And you can see that this is the only area that's really in focus, this one raspberry. As I go down to at 5.6 aperture, kind of a mid-range, you can see that I've got some nice depth of field, but I have, fall off too. Then when I go to f11, very small aperture, everything's in focus. I prefer this. This is probably what I would go with. But when I shoot, I usually will do a kind of a bracket like this. So I'll just try the different apertures to see what looks best when I finally get on the computer and play with it. Depth of field. Demonstrate the effect of aperture on depth of field. I started off with my 100mm lens and the first shot at f25. You notice everything is sharp from front to back. Then I stopped the lens down to f11, a little smaller, a little bit larger aperture, and the background's starting to go a little out of focus. Then I went down to 5.6, and the background's pretty soft. When I go down to 2.8, it's very soft, and the milk glass has become soft also, as are the lines between the boards, the seams. So what does this show you? It shows you that the larger the aperture, the shallower the depth of field. Here's look at this comparison of the f2.8 to the f25. Quite a bit of difference. Now I next went to my 50mm lens, kept the camera in the same place, so you can see that how much a wider angle of view you get with a 50 than 100. So then I had to move the camera in to kind of get the same size relationship. So that the front cookie's the same size as the other one was. They're very close to it. So I come in here. Now, it changes everything because you're closer to it, so your perspective is all different. But I started off with the 50mm at f22. So I open up the aperture to 5.6. The larger aperture, more light comes through, and the larger aperture creates shallower depth of field. Then I went to f1.8, which was the maximum on this lens, and you can see that the background went very, very soft. So what does this show you? It shows you that the comparison between the 100mm and the 50mm lens, that the longer the focal length, the shallower the depth of field. And also you notice that the longer lens compresses the scene. If you look at the 100mm, look at the size relationship between the cookies in the front and the cookies in the back. In the 100mm lens, they're closer in size than they are in the 50mm. The wider the lens, the more you get distortion like this, that the things in the foreground become larger. Well, a lot of people don't have a 1.8 lens or a 2.8 lens, and all they have is a 50mm 5.6 or a 55mm. Maybe you just have a kit lens. So if you have that and you want to get emphasize something by having a real shallow depth of field, the other option is distance to subject. The closer you are to your subject, the shallower the depth of field. So what I did here was I just moved in real tight, kind of filled the frame up with those cookies in the foreground. You can see how soft they're going in the background. Now, if you have a 1.8 lens, you can see the difference here. I mean, it really knocks it off. Even the back of the cookie and the front of the cookie is soft. So that's probably a little extreme. So I probably wouldn't even go that extreme. But it's nice to have that option. I went back to my 100mm. I wanted to really kind of do some macro shots. Just by being macro, you can come in. It means you can really come in tight. You can get like a one-to-one relationship. So I came in, started off kind of with the shot we'd been doing, and then I came in a little tighter, putting more emphasis on the cookies in the foreground. Then I came in even tighter to where the cookies in the foreground filled the frame, kind of like that shot. And then I came in really close. Now these are all at f5.6. Okay, so I got in really tight like this, and I go, let's go extreme. So I came in really tight, kind of focused on a raisin, and you can see that the front and the back are soft. That's because the closer you are to something, the shallower the depth of field. Well, what if I want to have this close up with a cookie, but I want it in focus? Well, then I go to a small aperture. So this is at f32. So I have the whole thing in focus here, which is kind of a cool shot. So what have we learned here? Well, there's three things that affect the depth of field. Probably the most important is aperture, and that's the opening of the lens. The larger the aperture, the shallower the depth of field. The second would be the focal length of the lens. The longer the lens, the shallower depth of field. And the third would be the distance from the subject. The closer you get to something, the less depth of field you have. So to get shallow depth of field or selective focus, what a lot of people do is start with a wide open aperture. And if they have a long lens, you'll try a long lens. And if you don't have any of those, if you just have, say, a 50 millimeter lens, and you want to really have shallow depth of field, then you have to get very close to the subject. So you have to compromise your composition sometimes to get what you need. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe for future videos.